the night Callie Mason's world fell apart. It was raining so hard she could barely see the road. She was sitting in the parking lot of St. Vincent's Hospital, her hands trembling so badly she could hardly hold her phone. Her baby boy, 7-month-old Noah, somewhere inside those cold white walls with wires taped to his tiny chest and machines beeping in a rhythm that felt more like a countdown than a heartbeat. She had driven 40 minutes through the storm with Noah screaming in the back seat, his lips turning a shade of blue that no mother should ever have to see. She had blown through 2 red lights. She had prayed out loud for the first time in years, ugly, desperate prayers that weren't pretty or rehearsed, just raw, broken words thrown at the ceiling of her rusted Honda Civic. And now the doctors were inside doing what doctors do, and she was outside doing what alone mothers do, trying not to fall apart completely while the rain hammered the roof of her car like it was trying to get in. Callie was 26 years old. She worked double shifts at a diner called Rosie's on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot but the tips were never enough. She had no husband, no boyfriend, no family within 400 miles. Her mother had passed 2 years ago. Her father had been gone long before that. The kind of gone that doesn't leave an address. She had Noah, and she had herself, and most days that felt like enough. But tonight, sitting in that parking lot with rain streaming down her windows and her heart in pieces, it didn't feel like enough. Tonight it felt like nothing. She unlocked her phone to call her coworker Dana, the only person she could think of, the only name in her contacts that felt like warmth. She scrolled too fast. Her fingers were shaking. She hit the wrong name. She didn't notice. She pressed the phone to her ear, and when the line picked up on the second ring, she just started talking. She talked the way a person talks when they've been holding everything in for too long and the dam finally breaks, not in sentences, but in pieces. She said Noah's name. She said the word blue. She said she was alone and she was scared, and she didn't know what was going to happen, and she didn't know how she was going to pay for any of this, and she was so tired. She was so tired of being strong. She was so tired of having no one to call. There was silence on the other end. Not the silence of a dropped call. Not the silence of discomfort. Just stillness, like someone listening with their whole body. Then a man's voice said quietly and clearly, "Which hospital?" Callie stopped. She pulled the phone from her ear and looked at the screen. The name on the display was not Dana. It was a contact she had saved months ago from a business card she'd found tucked under a coffee mug someone had left at the diner. She'd entered it thinking she might call about a catering job someday, something to make extra money, and she had never called, and she had completely forgotten it was there. The name on the screen said Daniel Holt. She had no idea who Daniel Holt was. She knew only that she had just sobbed her most private pain into the ear of a complete stranger. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, her voice cracking. I called the wrong number. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Which hospital?" he said again. Same tone, calm, unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be. "St. Vincent's," she whispered, because something in his voice made it impossible to lie, or deflect or pretend she was fine. "What's your name?"
Callie.
"Callie, I'm Daniel." "Your baby is inside right now?" "Yes." "Are you inside with him?" "No, I couldn't stay in there. I needed air. I'm in the parking lot." "Go back inside," he said. "Be with your son. I'll handle the rest." She almost laughed. Handle the rest. A stranger on the phone in the middle of the night, telling her he would handle the rest. She thought, this is what exhaustion does to a person. It makes you believe things. But she went back inside, because she had no other choice, and because his voice had sounded like something she hadn't heard in a very long time, like certainty. The next 3 hours were the longest of Callie's life. She sat in a plastic chair outside the pediatric ICU with Noah's little sock, the yellow one with ducks on it, that had fallen off when the nurses took him, folded in her hands. She had cried until she had no more tears. She had read every word on every bulletin board in the hallway, without absorbing a single one. She had drunk a cup of terrible hospital coffee and thrown it away after 2 sips. At 11:40, a nurse came to tell her that Noah was stable, that it had been a severe respiratory infection, caught just in time, that if she had waited another hour, the outcome could have been very different. The nurse said the words "very different" in that careful way medical people use when they mean something they don't want to say out loud. Callie pressed Noah's sock against her mouth and breathed. She had almost waited. She had almost talked herself out of coming. because the last time she'd taken Noah to urgent care for a fever, it had cost her $400 she didn't have, and she'd been paying it off in $50 installments for 3 months. She had almost waited until morning. She couldn't finish the thought. At midnight, a man walked through the main entrance of St. Vincent's Hospital. He was tall, maybe 40, wearing a dark jacket over a dress shirt with the collar open, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He walked to the front desk, said something to the woman there, and was directed toward the pediatric unit. Callie saw him coming down the hallway before he saw her. She didn't know why, but she knew immediately that it was him. There was something in the way he walked, not rushed, not performative, just purposeful, like a man who was exactly where he had decided to be. He stopped in front of her. "Callie?" She stood up slowly. She was wearing her work uniform, the pale blue polo and dark pants she'd had on when Noah's babysitter called her at the diner. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that had mostly come undone. She had mascara dried in streaks on both cheeks. She was aware, in some distant part of her brain, of how she looked. She was too tired to care. "You came," she said. "I said I would." He sat down in the chair next to hers, not across from her, not standing over her, next to her, like someone who intended to stay. "How is he?" "Stable. Respiratory infection. They said if I'd waited." Her voice gave out. "But you didn't wait," he said. "You came. That's what matters." She looked at him. "Why are you here? You don't know me. I called you by accident." Daniel Holt looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I know," he said. "But you weren't calling by accident, Callie. You were calling because you needed someone to answer. I just happened to be the one who picked up." She found out who he was in pieces over the next hour. As they sat in that hallway and talked the way two people talk when the normal rules of conversation don't apply because exhaustion has stripped everything down to honesty. Daniel Holt was the founder and CEO of Holt Medical Group, a healthcare company with 11 facilities across Ohio and Indiana. He was 42. He had built his company from a single, underfunded clinic in a low-income neighborhood in Dayton because his younger sister had died at 19 from a treatable condition that went untreated because their family had no insurance and no access. He had carried that with him for 20 years. He had turned it into something. He was, by any measure, one of the most powerful men in Columbus. And he was sitting in a plastic hospital chair eating a bag of chips from the vending machine next to Callie Mason, who worked at a diner and was still wearing her uniform, listening to her talk about Noah, about how he'd been born 6 weeks early, about how she'd spent the first month of his life driving to the NICU, every day before her shift and after her shift and sometimes during her break, about how the first time he smiled at her, she had completely fallen apart in the best way, about how she read to him every night, even though he was too small to understand, because she wanted his first memories of the world to be the sound of her voice. Daniel didn't say much. He listened. There is a particular kind of listening that is its own form of giving, and he had it. When a nurse came out to say that Callie could go in and see Noah, she stood up and then turned back to Daniel, uncertain. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know," he said. "Go see your son." She came out 40 minutes later with red eyes and something new in her face, not peace exactly, but relief. The specific relief of having touched the thing you love and confirmed it is still there. Daniel was still in the chair. "He had a coffee now?" He handed her one. She sat down and they were quiet for a while. And quiet can say things that words can't. Then he said, "I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to hear it the way it's meant." She looked at him. "Noah's bills," he said, "from tonight and whatever follows. I want to take care of them." She opened her mouth. "Before you say no," he said, "I want you to understand that this isn't charity and it isn't pity, and I'm not asking you for anything in return. I run a medical group. I have a foundation that was built specifically for situations like yours. Single parents in crisis, pediatric cases, families without adequate coverage. I have the means and the structure to do this, without it costing you a single night of sleep. Let me." Callie stared at him. She had been on her own for so long that the concept of someone simply helping, with no angle, no expectation, no debt attached, felt almost like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Why?" she said. "Why would you do that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because my sister's name was Emma, and she was 22 when she died. Not 19, I got that wrong earlier. She was 22, she was funny. She wanted to be a teacher. And she died because no one answered when we needed someone to answer. His jaw tightened slightly. I've spent 20 years making sure that isn't someone else's story. Tonight you called me by accident, Callie. But maybe there are no accidents. Maybe you called because the universe knew. You needed someone who understood exactly what it means to sit in a hallway like this and have no one. The hallway was very quiet. Callie Mason, who had held herself together through a premature birth and a year of double shifts and $400 bills paid in $50 chunks and nights, so lonely they had weight, felt something in her chest come loose. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. And then she pressed her hand over her eyes and cried. Not the desperate crying from the parking lot, but something different. The kind of crying that happens when something is finally okay. 6 months later, Noah was 10 months old and crawling at a speed that Callie described to anyone who would listen as genuinely alarming. He had her eyes, wide and dark and watchful, and a laugh that could reorganize a room. Callie had a new job. Not at the diner. She still worked there sometimes, because she liked the people and because Rosie had been kind to her. But she had been connected, through Daniel's foundation, with a healthcare advocacy nonprofit that needed someone who understood both the system and what it felt like to be crushed by it. She was good at it in a way that felt like purpose rather than work. She and Daniel were not a love story. Life is not always a love story, and this one wasn't. He was a presence, a steady, generous, uncomplicated presence, in the way that truly good people sometimes become in your life. He came to Noah's first birthday party. He brought a stuffed elephant and ate too much cake and laughed when Noah smeared frosting on his expensive jacket without a trace of pretension. But the love story, if there was one, was smaller and bigger than that. It was the story of a woman who had been alone in a parking lot in the rain, who had made one wrong call that turned out to be the only right call, and who had learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that asking for help is not weakness, that being found in your worst moment is not humiliation, that sometimes the universe places the right stranger at the end of the wrong number, and the only thing you have to do is not hang up. The duck sock, the yellow one, the one she'd been holding that night, was in a small box on Noah's shelf. She'd kept it. She would keep it forever. It would become one of those objects that a family builds its mythology around. The kind of thing you show your children when they're old enough to understand, when you're trying to explain how fragile everything is, and how sometimes, against all odds, it holds. Noah would never remember that night. He would never remember the beeping machines, or the wires, or the sound of rain on hospital glass. He would grow up knowing only that his mother was a woman who did not let go, who drove through the storm, who made the call, who didn't hang up. If you have made it this far, then you understand that in life, there comes a moment when everything hangs by a single thread. One wrong number, one unheard voice, one person who picks up the phone. This story is not just Callie's. It is the story of every person who stands alone and still refuses to lose hope. If this story touched your heart, then like this video right now. Subscribe to our channel, and make sure you share this video with at least one person who needs this story today. Because sometimes, one video is all it takes to change someone's night.